If none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny. That's lesson 20 of my book on tyranny, 20 lessons from the 20th century. I'm Timothy Snyder. I'm making a series of short films discussing each of these 20 lessons, and we've reached number 20. On Tyranny was a little book, a political pamphlet really, which I wrote in the end of 2016, meant as a guide for Americans who would be facing, as I thought then, some unexpected, unanticipated challenges to the rule of law, to pluralism, to democracy, to basic human rights. In the 5 years since then, On Tyranny has been read by a lot of people, Americans, but also others around the world. And it's been very gratifying to me to see how it's been read aloud in parliaments or in demonstrations in Europe and in Asia and in Africa and elsewhere. This is the last lesson. We've reached the end of the book. Those are the last words of the book. I'll say a few words about them now. What I'm doing now is I'm making a few remarks about where these lessons came from, and a few remarks about how I think they're still timely, or how I think they'll serve us moving into the future. So be as courageous as you can is number 20. If none of us is prepared to die for freedom, then all of us will die under tyranny. In these last 5 years since I wrote the book, a number of my friends have been imprisoned for shorter terms or for longer ones. In the 5 years since I've written this book, some people who I care about or respect or value have been killed or have died in ways that are connected to courage, courage for values, courage for rights. Those are further examples of courage, as if we needed more. I wrote the book on the basis of courageous stands that other people have taken. The premise of On Tyranny was not that I was so wise. The premise of On Tyranny was that there are people who have endured more difficult challenges than many of us have, and that some of those people have left behind testimony from which we can learn. In American history, that testimony is often from African Americans. In the part of the world that I work on, Eastern Europe, that testimony comes from those who survived fascism or Nazism or Stalinism. Those were the examples that, as a historian, I tended in this book to draw from. But there's something about courage, which of course goes beyond national borders or goes beyond even the border between history and the present. What history can do is that it can give us examples of people who, perhaps surprisingly to others or even to themselves, behaved in a way which was unpredictable and which set an example. Sometimes in our own media or in our films, we make courage impossible. We make courage an example, make courage something which is carried out by an individual who's extraordinary, who stands apart from everyone else. We make courage something which happens on the mountaintops. We make courage something that happens in some faraway country. But in my limited experience, at least, with people who I admire as courageous, in my experience as a historian, I think what we often see is that courage can take small forms. It can take everyday forms. It doesn't belittle the courage that people show in an uprising or in a protest on a battlefield to say that it can be very hard to make eye contact. It can be very hard to say that word which contradicts what everyone else thinks. It can be very hard just to be that different personality who is not swayed by what everyone else is doing, as I talk about in lessons number 1 and in lessons number 9. Courage can take small forms. The important question is whether we choose to be as courageous as we can. Some of us can be more courageous than others. In the United States, in 2021, an act of courage for an illegal immigrant is something very different than an act of courage for a citizen, and we have to respect that. That's why I wrote, "Be as courageous as you can." But many Americans most Americans, most people in the United States can still take courageous gestures, can still carry out small acts of courage or larger ones, and reasonably believe that they will be free people afterwards. So what's our excuse? What's our excuse? People around the world are taking risks for freedom. If we look up from our own preoccupations and our own problems for a moment, we can see them and we can respect them. And people in the United States are doing the same thing. But more of us need to do this, whether it's in small ways or large. The point is to be as courageous as you can. This isn't just about, though, what we do and how we feel and how others think of us and how we will think about ourselves as we get older and look back on the choices that we made. It's also about the chances that tyrants have to rule us. Because if prospective tyrants, if the people who want to rule us, look out and see people who are willing to take small chances, willing to take risks, people who are being as courageous as you can, they're less likely to take risks. They're less likely to do the things that they need to do to seize power. So be as courageous as you can. It has to do with daily life, but like so many of these other lessons, it also has to do with the way things finally turn out. That was lesson 20. Be as courageous as you can. Thanks for being with me.